With this series of Retopo videos, I wanted to utilize a mesh that a lot of people had access to. And for most people retopologizing, we're all starting with ZBrush as a common base. A few people out there probably use something else like Mudbox or Blender or something to build a shape in. But for ZBrush specifically, Nick Zuccarello is an incredible artist who a few versions of ZBrush ago started sharing one of the base meshes that he created. Now this is a really good base mesh and it's got really good organized topology, right? So if we look at the topology here, I'm just going to hit Shift F in ZBrush so we can see he's got everything nice and poly grouped out, and the topo goes all the way down to having edge loops for the belly button, the nipples, the sternoclavicular notch, the bottom of the pectorals where they meet the rib cage, right? So there's a lot of information in here, which is pretty nice. Most of the time when we're creating things in ZBrush, we're using things like Dynamesh and ZRemesher, and we don't really have the best, most organized topology. To the untrained eye, you might think that ZRemesher gives you a good enough result, but when you look at something that's been manually retopologized in a way that this has, you can see that by default, out the box, ZRemesher is not going to give you anything close to something being this clean, right? So basically, what I wanted people to be able to do was take a common mesh like this and then maybe augment it a little bit if you wanted to follow the exact steps that I'm using in this method. So what I did was I took the human average male that Nick has, and to get to that, if you hit comma on the keyboard and go to Lightbox, you go to the tool menu and you go to Nick Z human male, his Z tool, double click it, it'll load the Z tool. And what I did was the top subtool here, I just hit clone, and that created a new clone for me. And in the clone, what I did was I went up to Z plugin, decimation master, and then I usually drag this slider all the way to the right, and then from there I drag it all the way to the left until I get to a number that's below 100,000 polys. When I get to a number that's below 100,000 polys, I hit preprocess current and then decimate current when that's done. And that gives me a decimated mesh like this, where it's really just a bunch of triangles like this. You'll also notice that I eliminated his genitalia. That's not because I'm opposed to seeing virtual genitalia. It's because most of the time in productions, that stuff's just not modeled in. So I wanted to treat this like a production mesh, right? Now, the whole goal here is just to have a good retopo target that if someone wanted to follow along step by step, they also have access to the retopo target. So this was a sort of low-hanging fruit way to do it. Thank you, Nick, for sharing this mesh with the rest of the community. And these tutorials are obviously free as well, right? So if you don't know Nick's work, you should check him out online. That's Nick Zuccarello. I'll put his name up over this part of the video so you can sort of see exactly how to spell it, and you can get to his blog and see his amazing work, right? So now if we have this decimated mesh at this point, there's only one other thing that I like to do. When I'm exporting things to Maya, a lot of times we end up in a situation where you get non-manifold geometry through decimation master, meaning you have the geometry that's not legal for other programs to understand. So Maya has trouble sometimes importing things with non-manifold geometry. So what I can do in that case is I can come over here and I can hit check mesh integrity. Now I've already done it with this mesh, so I know this mesh is fine. But if there was an issue with this mesh, what I could do then is hit fix mesh. And usually that gets rid of any non-manifold geometry, and I can export the model from there. So I exported this model earlier, and I called it Nick Z Human Average Retopo Target 90K. And I like to put the name like that in there. The retopo target it's the thing that I'm going to target for retopo, and the 90K is just how dense the model is, just so even in Windows at a glance I can see sort of what's happening. And you can see already some of the other videos are already done, and I'm sort of working backwards in a couple of these videos, so you're peeking behind the curtain looking at these little thumbnails here. So now if we go to my here, I've got a new scene, and I'm going to say File, Import, and I'm going to grab that mesh and frame it up. and I'll show my grid, and we can see that he's, you know, facing forward on the grid. The way that I normally set up my scene is I will open up the channel box, make a new layer, select the object, add that to the layer, and then I'll double click the layer and just rename it and call it something like Retopo Dummy. Right? And this is just so I can turn the visibility on and off really quickly on the layer. And if I show the rest of the UI, so Control Spacebar, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make that object live. Now, if you've never used QuadDraw before, QuadDraw is a really great retopo tool, and I know that there are a number of automatic topology solutions coming online, ZRemesher being one of them. They're really great for creating a sculptable topology, but what I found is trying to get those things to deliver a topology that is suitable for high-level animation for a AAA game title or for a film is really challenging and sometimes next to impossible depending on the shape of the mesh. So manual retopology is a really necessary step, unfortunately. I find it to be boring, but hopefully in this series of videos you'll pick up ways to maybe speed it up, right? So really quickly, the way QuadDraw works, when you go to your modeling toolbox right here, you go to QuadDraw, and as long as you have a model that's a live surface here, you can click down and lay out little dots, and if you hold shift, it'll let you connect the dots. If you hit B on the keyboard, you can turn soft selection on, and if you're familiar with Maya, you sort of know how that works. So that soft selection on, it's moving more than one point, and if I turn B off, now I'm moving one point at a time. By default, auto weld is turned on, so if I take these 2 points and drag them to the center, you'll see they connect up. Also up here I have world symmetry turned on to world X, right? You can also turn it on right over here, world X. And that's how I'm able to work on one side of the model and have everything update to the other side. Later on you'll see that, you know, there's times when I like to break symmetry and times when I like to continue symmetry. Later on, if I want to add more detail to this, I can hold Control and it'll allow me to add more resolution to the model. And when I add resolution, let's say I add a couple of edges here and then a really far out edge there, I'm going to hit B on the keyboard and drag a little bit to make my soft selection bigger. You can see it's like a little heat map, yellow in the middle, then red, and then sort of darker brown to black on the outskirts. If I hold Shift, you can see that it says relax under my cursor, and now it'll try and average out those points while still sucking them onto the curvature of the surface. And if I hold Shift and press in the middle here, it's relaxing all the middle points, but if I hold Shift and press over one of the outer boundary edges, we're going to see that now it's only relaxing the outer edges, right? So this is a really quick way to get a good topological solution. A couple of other quick things you can do here. You can extrude edges. So if I go back into QuadDraw mode and then I go and I hold the Tab key, which is a weird key, it'll allow me to extrude out. So Tab and middle mouse will extrude an entire edge loop right before it hits a corner. So I can go here and go out like that. If I want to get just a single edge, Tab and left mouse will allow me to just get a single edge. If I hold Tab and just click and drag, it'll allow me to draw out a strip, although I don't really use this that much. You can also do things when you have individual edges, like if you leave QuadDraw mode, you can come over here and right click on the model and go to edge mode, and you can select two edges or multiple edges, and I'm going to hit B to turn off soft selection, and I'm actually going to go over to my layer and turn it off because we don't need to see the mesh for this. But if I go back over here to my modeling toolbox, I can bridge between edges, right? So I can grab one edge, another edge, and hit bridge, and it'll bridge between those two edges, right? So those are the ways that the simple tools that I'm going to use over and over and over again in this demonstration. And if you're familiar with QuadDraw, that's great. If you're not, you can look up how to use QuadDraw in Maya. It's very straightforward and simple. But the things that you need to know are importing and exporting out of ZBrush, decimation, because if you try to export something out of ZBrush that has millions of polygons and you try to bring it into Maya, most likely Maya is going to be incredibly slow or not be able to load the model. Maya's loading capability of models, I find about 100,000 polygons to be really fast, and you can work with it really easily. And you need to know how to make an object live, right? So hitting this little guy right here. In all of these videos, there's a little box down here on the left where anytime I'm hitting a mouse button or a key, you can see exactly what I'm hitting. So sometimes if you see something I'm doing and it doesn't make sense, you can look and see what I'm doing here. You can also always reach out to me and ask anything. Hey, in this video you're doing this thing at this timestamp, you know, 1 minute and 27 seconds. What is that, right? And I'll be happy to sort of reach out and try to answer you, right? So now let's get into Retopo, and in the first actual Retopo video, what we're going to do is try to retopologize the hands, the arms, the torso, and the neck. All right.